So last week we started the study in the book of Daniel, and we went through chapter 1 talking about how Daniel was one of the first sets of captives brought out of the land of Judah, out of Jerusalem. Whenever the Babylonians came in, they took over. Nebuchadnezzar ordered that they find smart, good-looking guys that could learn the Chaldean wisdom and understand everything quickly, and that way they could be advisors. So in Daniel chapter 2, we move on a little bit into something that helps promote Daniel up into a higher position. Now remember, Daniel is a slave. His whole life he's basically a slave. But even in that position, God takes care of him. And God promotes him and brings him to very high levels. And so this is really the theme of Daniel, once again, is the sovereignty of God. Even though here on earth Daniel was a slave, God can put slaves in places of leadership because God is sovereign. And so in chapter 2, it starts out in verse 1, it says, "Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave a command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, 'I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream.' Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, 'O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation.'" So I'm going to pause a lot in here just to give little comments here and there. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and if you remember last week, I said that more than likely Daniel went to classes on how to interpret dreams properly, because that was a common practice in this time frame, especially in the kingdom of Babylon. And so this wasn't something that was just unheard of. Oh my gosh, I had a dream. Could it mean something? That's not what's going on here. This is a common practice. People would have dreams and they'd go, I don't have someone to interpret it. It happened back in the book of Genesis with Joseph. Whenever he was in the prison with the chief butler and the chief baker, they both had a dream, and why were they sad? They said, there's a dream and there's no one here to interpret it. In other words, I know it means something, I just don't know how to interpret it. I don't have the person who has been trained in that. So Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and he says, call everyone. I mean everyone. The heads of every branch. He called the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. He didn't leave any branch of wisdom in ancient Babylon out. He said, call the leaders of every group, the best ones. And so they brought them all before the king. Now at this point, Daniel is not included in that group because he's not the leader of anything right now. He's barely been promoted up. Hey, you're a pretty good advisor. You're going to serve before the king. You're not a wise man, but you're a good guy to have around, right? And so the Chaldeans, they're like, yeah, this is our realm. This is our area. The Chaldeans speak up before any of the astrologers or the magicians or sorcerers, and they said, hey, king, not a problem. You tell me your dream, I will tell you its interpretation. We've been trained in this. I've got a degree in interpreting dreams. Here it is. Just tell me your dream. And in verse 8, the king says, and the king answered and said, sorry, I jumped down. I do that a lot. Verse 5, that is. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces. Your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream to me and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and the interpretation. So Nebuchadnezzar has figured out somewhere in the past, he has gotten some kind of an idea in his head that these people are lying to him. His wise men and his soothsayers and sorcerers and all this thing. He's like, you know what? This is a real dream. I don't need a fake interpretation. I don't want someone trying to make me happy by giving me a good interpretation. I need to know what this dream really means. So, being that these people, the magicians, astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, claim to be the spokesmen of the gods. If they are truly the spokesmen of the gods, tell me the dream I had last night. And then you can tell me the interpretation. That's how I can trust that you're not lying to me. You tell me what I dreamed. If you don't, the NIV and the New King James translate it, you will be cut in pieces. I believe it's the King James that says you will be torn in pieces. No? One of the interpretations says you will be torn in pieces. And the reason why that is because in the original language, there is no verb for cut in the story. There is one for tear. And one of the traditional ways to execute someone in this kingdom was they would get 4 trees that were fairly sturdy but somewhat pliable, and they would bend them together like that. And they would bend them and tie them so that they stayed, their tops were like that. Then they would tie your arms and legs to each branch, and they would cut the rope holding the trees. And it would literally tear them to pieces. He said, you don't tell me what's going on, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You will be torn in pieces. The English actually medieval times, they actually had something similar to this. They call it being drawn and quartered. Yeah. They would tie you between 4 horses and have the horses run in different directions. Same concept, being literally torn apart. And in the original language it says, you will become limbs. Torn to become limbs, I think is the way it says it. And so it's talking about the trees pulling apart, and they will be hanging like limbs on a tree. So this wasn't just a nice little, hey, you're going to be executed. I'm going to cut off your head first, then I'm going to cut you in pieces. No, this is going to be painful. This is not just death that I'm offering you if you can't tell me my dream last night. And so the Chaldeans, you notice it doesn't mention the astrologers, sorcerers, and magicians anymore. They stepped back, they said, this is their realm. They're the dream interpreters. We're going to let them see what happens over there, because we're not touching that. The Chaldeans speak up again. Of course, he does have, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you're going to receive gifts, rewards, great honor. So tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered in verse 7. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. All you got to do is let us know what the dream is, king. I'll do anything you want if you just tell me this dream, please. Because they see what's about to happen, and they don't want that. And not only do they die, he's talking about cutting off their whole family. Your house will become an ash heap, a rubble. In other words, we're going to burn it to the ground, destroy it, anyone who's in it with it. And I'm not going to let anyone rebuild on that site. You will be known forever as the one who disappointed the king. It is a permanent thing going on here. So they're freaking out. In verse 8, the king says, I know for certain, the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. He says, I know that you're just trying to buy time here. You're trying to come up with something, trying to get me to let slip something about the dream so that you can lie to me. You've all agreed to lie for me for years now. He says, you've agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till time has changed. In other words, it's been happening for a long time. And you've agreed on this. And so here's your test. You guys claim to be able to talk to the gods. And they tell you secrets. Have them tell you my secret. Because if not, you're going to die. That's what he said. That's it. Verse 10, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. Notice they throw them back in there. Like, you're not getting out of it that easy. He says, it is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. So the Chaldeans said, there's not a man on earth. There is no one alive who can tell the king what he wants to know. You want to know what you want us to tell you what you dreamed last night without telling us first what it is. That's impossible. No one can do that. There's not a man. And it is so unreasonable of you to ask that. They're taking their life in their hands right there. It is so unreasonable for you to ask us that there has never been a ruler on the planet that has ever asked something like this before. It is impossible. How can you be so unreasonable? Is there?
They figure they're going to die anyways.
It's their underlying theme. No one did this because it's ridiculous. You can't require this of us. It's not sane. Nebuchadnezzar, please rethink this. The only ones that can do it are the gods. And of course, they're supposed to be the spokesman for the gods. And they said, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Basically, what they're saying is that the gods know what you dreamed last night, but they don't share those kind of secrets. That's not the kind of things they talk to us about. They don't gossip like that. They're not going to tell us. It's not going to work. So this is unreasonable, king. Please rethink it, because this is an unreasonable request. And as soon as they said that, verse 12, for this reason, the king was angry and very furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men in Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So now we see why this story is included in Daniel. Okay? King gets mad. He's like, you're calling me unreasonable? You've been telling me for years that you talk to the gods, that you guys are like this with the gods. They're telling you all kinds of secrets that have gone on in the world, and I've been following your advice. I'm unreasonable? You know what? He turns over and looks at his, according to extra-biblical sources, the guy's name was Arioch, which we'll see here in a second, but he turns to his captain of his bodyguards, who's sitting right next to him. And he says, Arioch? Yes, sir. Kill them all. The ones in this room? No. Every person who's considered a wise man, who's gone through the training to become a wise man, kill them all. So they went out, and they started killing them. His decree was so abrupt that I don't think they decided to just tear him to pieces. He just said, kill them. I don't care anymore. Just kill them all. They're all lying to me. I don't want any of them in my kingdom. So they went out and they started doing it, and they sought Daniel and his companions. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those ones are the newest, in the newest graduating class of wise men. They're low on the totem pole, but they're gonna die just like everyone else. I imagine that no one who was standing before the king made it out of that room alive. Those were the first ones to go. So all the heads of the different branches of Babylonian wisdom, they're all gone. That's it. And so they go out to find Daniel and his companions. They said, hey, those new guys, they served before you, king. Let's get them next. And so they go out, and they're looking for Daniel. And in verse 14, it says, then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch. So Arioch's already got to it. He said, Daniel, you're a pretty good guy, but it's time for you to die. That's what's going to happen. King said it, it happens. And so Daniel answers. I like the way it says he answered. Arioch comes in. Evidently, Arioch knew Daniel, because obviously he was there whenever the king questioned him. He's the captain of the king's personal bodyguard. So he's there. And he talks to Daniel. He's like, hey, Daniel, the decree went out. I got to kill all the wise men. I know you just became a wise man, but you're one of them. And he says, wait. And look what he says. He answers Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Arioch comes in. He's like, Daniel, you got to die. Sorry about this. You're a good guy. I like you, but you're going to die. And Daniel's like, wait. Why am I going to die? just let me know. The king ordered it. Why is the king's order so urgent? You're not even holding public executions. You're just killing them all. Why is it so urgent? And Arioch says, well, the king had a dream. Daniel says, okay. Says, the king wants to know what the dream means. He says, okay, we were trained in that. Says, the king wants you to tell the dream before you tell the interpretation. Daniel goes, oh. Now I understand. Because he knows that none of these people are going to be able to do that. He knows that there is no way that these false gods are going to be able to tell the king his dream. And so in verse 16, he says, so Daniel went and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house, made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they may seek the mercies of God from heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision, so Daniel blessed the God of heaven. I'm going to pause there for a second. Daniel went before the king. He's supposed to die. He says, looks at Arioch, says, look, I'm not going anywhere. You know that. I'm a slave. Where would I go? Come on. It's like, but let me go ask the king real quick. Just a question. And so Arioch's like, okay. So Daniel goes up before the king. He says, hey, king, just give me a little bit of time. I will do what you want me to. Talk about confidence. Daniel went before the king and said, just give me a little bit of time. I'll do what you want me to do. And he goes home. The house that he shares with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he tells them, hey, look, we got a problem. All the wise men are being executed. And they're like, oh, why? You know? And he's like, well, the king wants us to tell him what he dreamed the other night. And they went, I'm sorry? He says, if we can't tell him the dream that he dreamed, then we're all going to die too. So, being godly young men, they go directly to prayer. But they're not praying so that they can give peace of mind to Nebuchadnezzar. You caught that, right? It gives the reason for their prayer very clearly. So that they might not die with everybody else. You could kill them all. But I don't want to die. So I'm going to talk to my God. You guys talk to your gods, I'll talk to my God. And so they go and they start calling out to God. The first thing they do is pray. And it's amazing to me because they're facing death. They don't think, okay, we've got a little bit of time. Do you think we can get out of here? Do you think we could go to another province? They don't even consider running away. They just say, okay, that's the decree. Let's meet the requirements so we don't die like everyone else will. And so they go to pray. Prayer moves the hand of God. They are already slaves. They've been put in medium positions as wise men. They're not hauling water, but they're not, ruling the kingdom. They're in medium positions. But prayer moves the hand of God. Whenever God wants something to happen, he puts his people in a position to pray. And so they immediately start praying. And they get this group together and they start praying. And because of the prayers, Daniel and his 3 friends are saved. I mean, it's all because of prayer. Prayer moves the hand of God. And so many times in today's world, prayer is like a last resort. Oh, okay, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried that. I better call out to God. It's all I got left. And that is so backwards thinking. The very first thing we should do when we face a problem is pray. Pray. And it's throughout the Bible. It talks about praying first. The people who are successful in what they do, they always prayed before they acted, not acted and then prayed. And so we need to get that into our heads and follow Daniel's example here. He saw the problem, he found out what the real problem was, and he went to God and said, hey, I can't do this, but I know you can. Help me out. And so they prayed that Daniel and his companions may not perish. And then what does God do? It's an amazing thing to me. God says, okay, I will give you the same dream. You caught that? It says, it was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So now Daniel is dreaming Nebuchadnezzar's dream. What a crazy idea, right? Could you imagine waking up and going, what was that? If that's not the dream Nebuchadnezzar had, I don't know what that was. And so this has to be it. It has to be it. Daniel believed. And so he praised God in verse 20. He says, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. Daniel was so confident that this was it. He just had a dream. He could have been way off base. But he was so confident that he thanked God that he had the answer before he went and confirmed it with Nebuchadnezzar. But look at what he says. He says, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and might are his. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom. He gives knowledge. I like the fact that it says he gives knowledge to those who have understanding. In other words, if you can't understand it, he's not going to give you the knowledge. So, there's a balance there. He reveals deep and secret things. He just gave someone's dream to Daniel. He knows what is in darkness, and light dwells with him. He says, I thank you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. Man, it's just a beautiful prayer of thanksgiving. And then in verse 24, it says, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, back to the king's bodyguard. He says, whom the king appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. I imagine that Arioch was still killing people. He was just not killing Daniel and his friends. Because Daniel said, hey, king, can you spare us for a little bit and we will tell you what you want to know. I don't care about that. And so he goes to Arioch and he says this to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. So, Daniel's pretty confident in what he's doing. He goes up to the bodyguard, who's still killing wise men. He says, hey, take a break for a minute. Stop killing everyone. Take me before the king. I'm going to do what he asks of me. And I love Arioch's response. I mean, this is the perfect example of a suck-up. Okay? Look at what he says. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, and he said to him, I have found the man. I have found the man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. He trusted Daniel enough. I mean, Arioch could be executed for this because he's taken all the credit. All the credit means all the responsibility if Daniel's wrong. And Arioch's like, king, I found the guy. I found the guy. He's going to tell you your dream and the interpretation. I found him. You should be happy with me because I found the guy. Right? And so the king answered and said to Daniel, spoke directly to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. He says, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? The king is skeptical. The king doesn't believe it. Because his wise men have already told him it's impossible. He says, well, impossible as it is, you're going to die if you don't do it. And so, all of a sudden Daniel comes up, and Daniel serves a God that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't believe in. All the wise men don't believe it. It's him and his three friends. Those are the four that believe in God. And so he tells them, you're going to be able to tell me the dream and the interpretation? And so in verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were in bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you might know the thoughts of your heart. So he says, the king, the decision, the secret that you've demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, all those people, none of them can do it. It's impossible. He says, but there is a God in heaven, and he knows all secrets. And he's told me what's going to happen. Now, what Daniel is saying in a very, very subtle way is, all those gods you believe in, they're trash, but there is a real God, and he tells me what you want to know. Your gods are garbage. My God is real. And so he's waking Nebuchadnezzar up. I mean, right at this very beginning, this is where Nebuchadnezzar is starting to realize that God is real. And all his false gods are not. Starting to lay the groundwork for future events that are going to happen. And then he says, the dream, the visions in your head, the dream you had, they happened because you were laying on your bed, and you were laying there and you were going, I wonder what's going to happen after I die. I wonder what will happen. And then you fell asleep. And God, the one who knows the future, the one in heaven, decided to tell you the answer to your question. You know, we say a lot in the Christian world that God doesn't hear prayers of unsaved people. I think that's not true. I believe God knows the prayers of the unsaved people. He's answered them too many times. And here's an obvious example, because Nebuchadnezzar didn't even believe that God was real. And he didn't even pray. He was just laying on his bed, and the thoughts of his head were, I wonder what's going to happen when I die. And he says, so the God who reveals secrets has told me so that I could tell you. And I want you to know, it's not because I'm wiser than all of your other wise men or anyone else on the planet. He says, it's not because I'm all that great. He says, the reason God has told me this is so that you don't kill me and my friends. It's for our sake that's revealing it to you. That's the whole reason. Oh, and as a side note, so that you'll know what you're thinking. But the main reason, it's for my sake, not yours. But I'll let you know. I'll let you in on the secret. I'll tell you. Because God told me to save my life, not to save your life or your kingdom. I mean, it's just, whenever you read the language and start really looking at what Daniel says, it's just funny. He's like, God didn't tell me this to help you out. He told me this so that you didn't kill me. Evidently, he has a plan for me to be here, so he wants me alive. Verse 31, he says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This thing was big in his dream. The image's head was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed together, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, I got to be honest. If I had a dream like that, and I remembered that kind of detail when I woke up, you better believe I'd be praying to God saying, what in the world was that all about? He says, you were watching, you were standing there, O king, and there was this statue. And it was huge. It was awesome. Its head was of pure, shiny gold. Its chest and its arms were of this beautiful silver. Its belly and its thighs were all made of bronze. Its legs were of iron. And its feet and toes were iron mixed with clay. Just seeing that in a dream would make you go, what in the world am I looking at? What is this thing? He says, then, as you watched, this big rock was pulled out of the ground, or out of the mountain. Some people say mountain, some people say ground. Pulled out, and it rolled down the mountain, and it struck the image on its toes that are iron and clay. Well, whenever you crush the feet of a statue, guess what happens? The whole thing falls. And it fell, but as everything fell, they ground to powder. They turned into this like chaff on the summer floor. This light powder. It says, and the wind blew them away to where there was no trace of them whatsoever. Then that rock started to grow, and it became a mountain that filled the whole earth. What a dream. I would have woke up and told him the same thing. I need to know what this means. And that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did. verse 36, he says, "This is the dream. Now we will then tell you Now we will tell the interpretation before the king." I love the fact that Daniel includes Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. There's no other mention of them in this story. But Daniel says, I imagine them standing right behind him, because they don't want to be out there with the wise men right now. And he says, we are going to tell you what this means. 37. "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or beasts of the field, or birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand, and he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold." Make the king feel pretty good. I am. I'm as good as gold, baby. You know? I've been given all this. I love the fact that Daniel calls him a king of kings, which he was. In today's mentality, we would call that an emperor, but a king of kings. But right after that, he says, because God has given you. The reason you're a king of kings is because the sovereign God of heaven and earth has decided that you will be a king of kings. That's the only reason. Daniel keeps God's sovereignty highest. And so he says, you are this head of gold. You are that. Then he says, in verse 39, he says, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. That's all he says about the chest and arms of silver. After you, there's going to be another kingdom. This, of course, is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. They conquered Babylon. In fact, in the book of Daniel, we will see that transition happen. It means Nebuchadnezzar's glory, which was incredible. He conquered like crazy. Didn't last very long. 21 years after his death, Babylon was completely taken over by the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians, let's see, they were supreme in the Middle East for almost 2 centuries. So 200 years. They were the supreme nation in the Middle East. The second half of 39 says, then another third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. The third kingdom of bronze, looking back, we know, just like the Medes and the Persians, we know that the Bronze Empire was the Greco-Mediterranean Macedonian Empire established by Alexander the Great. It's the Greeks. The Greeks take over. He began his invasion in Persia in 334, crushed its last resistance in 331, and established a realm extending from the border of Yugoslavia to beyond the Indus Valley in India, the largest civilization of ancient times. That's Alexander the Great. There's a story that's told, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard the story. I hear a lot of stories about Alexander the Great, and I never verify them. It's just easier to tell the story. But there's a story that he goes and he conquers and he conquers. He gets all the way to the ocean in his conquering. And it says he knelt down on the beach and started crying. And whenever someone asked him, why are you crying? He said, because there's no more land to conquer. That's how vast his empire was. He advanced the Greek civilization through everything. The Greek civilization lasted for 300 years. 3 centuries. Well, there's argument on that. Either between 260 years or 300 years. That's how long the Greeks ruled the Middle East area. They took over. Verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks and in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all others. And there's only one kingdom that could be. That's Rome. Rome came in and conquered, and they lasted until 117 AD. So you're talking another 2 to 3 centuries where Rome took over. They were there, but the problem with Rome is it started out like the legs of iron, just solid as can be. But then there was civil unrest, civil upheaval. There were differences between what the Senate wanted, because Rome was ruled by a Senate for a while, and what the leader wanted, and eventually they took over and became the Roman emperors. Caesar Augustus and Julius Caesar, those were the first emperors, and they went through, and we have record of all that happening. Before then, the Senate was ruling, and it was strong and unified, but then things started to fall apart when the empire got so stinking big. And so you have the Romans, and like that upheaval in verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes and feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Why didn't the Roman Empire work? Why didn't any empire in the history of the world be able to rule the entire world? Because God said right here, it will not work. He decided that way back whenever man was all unified and building this very specific tower out in the plains of Shinar. Guess what city is in the plains of Shinar? Babylon. Remember, it says they took them to the plains of Shinar, to Babylon. This is the same place. Tower of Babel, Babylon. This is the original city. This is where the Tower of Babel was. It's crazy to think about that this is the same place that God came down and said, no, I don't think I like what you're doing. And so they go, and so there's this problem where you can't mix iron with clay. And that's why they use clay to mold iron. You melt the iron down, you pour it into the vessel that's made out of clay, and it doesn't mix with it. And you can, when it cools, you can pull the iron out, and you've got an iron item, and the clay is still there. It doesn't mix, but the thing's feet were mixed with iron and clay. So is iron, you can throw it against the ground, it won't break. Clay, you throw it against the ground, it's going to shatter. They don't mix. And so he says, they're going to try and intermix all of the races of the world to create a single government. But it will not work. Daniel proclaimed it then, just as God proclaimed it at the Tower of Babel. He said it will not work. We have been trying, as a human race, we have been trying to unify the entire world since the Tower of Babel. That's what, over in Europe, it just kept happening. That's why, at one point, who was it? Queen Victoria was called the grandmother of Europe, because she was related to every ruling member in Europe. Every monarch were her children or grandchildren, because they were trying to mingle the seed of men and trying to create a unified race that could just take over the whole world. And it didn't work then, it won't work now, just like it didn't work back in Babylon. Why? Because God said it won't work. In today's world, we are moving still in modern times towards a one world government. We are trying to get there. And I got news for you. It won't work. We may have a time in the future where there is a government that actually rules the whole world, but it will fall apart just like Rome fell apart. Why? Because God said it will. In fact, it's predicted in the book of Revelation that we're going to have some type of one world government, whether it's political or religious or whatever, or monetary. We're going to be unified, and that's when the Antichrist is in control. And when the Antichrist is in control, God just starts throwing out wrath and saying, oh yeah, here, try this. Here, try this. Try this. And there's going to be so much upheaval. Even in the book of Revelation, it talks about that there's going to be, 10 kings, and then 3 of them are going to rebel. It shows that there's still going to be those problems that people don't want to follow, and they're going to try and create their own civilization because God said you cannot create a one world government. God said it. It will never work for us. And Rome tried it, and it didn't work. But during the time that Rome was in power, something very special happens. In verse 44, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Notice this is the first one where it says God will set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain, cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. During the time of the Roman government, right around 0, the year 0, there was born Jesus Christ. This is the kingdom. He is the rock of our salvation. The rock was cut out of the mountain without hands because no man sets up God's kingdom. God sets up God's kingdom. That boulder of Jesus Christ rolled down the hill. I like the fact that it was established on the mountain. Jesus died on the mountain to establish that kingdom. It rolled down and it destroyed all of those other kingdoms to where not a trace of it remains. Remember the dream? All of those other kingdoms collapsed, turned into powder, and the wind blew them away to where there was no trace. In today's world, the Greek civilization, the nation of Greece exists, but it's not the same civilization that was there. The city of Rome exists, but it's not the Roman civilization that was there. Babylon has not been rebuilt because that was proclaimed. Babylon was destroyed, and it still hasn't been rebuilt. But these civilizations, their influence may exist because we still know some of the Greek stuff. We know a lot of the Roman stuff. We have a lot of build-up there. But God's kingdom is still wiping them out. God set up his kingdom through his son, Jesus Christ. He died for our sins, set up this kingdom, and it just keeps growing. The enemy attacks, but we grow. That's why Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Why does it say the gates of hell will not prevail against it? Because the gates don't move. Hell's kingdom is not advancing. God's kingdom is advancing, and it's pushing out all the other kingdoms. That's the kingdom we belong to. We get so caught up in some of the different things that happen in our nation, and I still believe that the United States is the best nation on the planet. I believe we are the best place to live, and I believe this is the place that God is moving at the moment, and God has a special place for the United States. But I got to tell you, this is my second citizenship. My first citizenship is in heaven. I have a heavenly kingdom that is more important than any kingdom on this planet. I've been in situations to where I've seen the American flag, the United States flag, and it brings me to tears. But I tell you what, there's been even more times where I see the Christian flag fly, and it's brought me to tears. It's because my kingdom, my citizenship, is not with an earthly kingdom, because they will all disappear. There's going to come a time when we do have a one world government, and it is going to thrive because it's going to be Jesus Christ sitting upon a throne. And he's going to rule over all. That's our kingdom. That's our hope. That's our confidence. That we know who he is, and he's the one who holds us in the palm of his hand. We are part of a much better kingdom. And it says it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made it known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain. Notice he doesn't even ask King Nebuchadnezzar. He just tells him the dream is certain and the interpretation is real. Could you imagine Nebuchadnezzar? He starts off, you're going to be able to tell me my dream and then the interpretation? And then Daniel says, you were looking and there was this image. He said, and he kind of unfolded his arms. He said the head was of fine gold. The chest and arms were silver. He starts leaning forward. I'm sure at one point he probably stood up and started going, how do you know this? How do you know? Because there's a God in heaven. People today don't really believe in the God of heaven. Some people, they believe there's a God somewhere out there, but they don't have him in their hearts. They don't believe that he's real. They're no better than Nebuchadnezzar, who believed in all the false gods. Yeah, there's a God out there. Well, that doesn't help. You don't know him. The demons believe there's a God. They know there's a God. They've met him. And they're afraid of him. And yet people here on earth, they're insane because they say, well, I'm not afraid of God. You haven't met him face to face yet. You haven't been in his presence. Trust me, I've been in his presence. God has blessed me with some incredible visions and sights in my prayer time. And I tell you, when you stand before that throne, you will be trembling. Because it's awesome. He says the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering of incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. The King of kings, Nebuchadnezzar, prostrates himself and bows before the slave of the King of Kings. You want to talk about being brought to the knowledge and recognition of someone powerful. This is it. He even offered him an offering of incense. Which is like, we need to start burning incense because this guy, he's smart. I mean, it's just, that's it, you know? And I'm sure Daniel, knowing Daniel and the other three, they probably, as soon as they started offering the incense, they probably went back to Old Testament and said, this is to you, God. This is not to me. God didn't make this known because I'm smarter than anyone. Remember his first comment. Says he made this known so that you won't kill me. That's the whole purpose. Then Nebuchadnezzar promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel also positioned the king, and he sent Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate or the court of the king. So he gave him many gifts, just like he promised. Gave him these great, precious things. And then he said, by the way, Daniel, you're still my servant, but I tell you what, you are in control of anything that happens in the province of Babylon. You may not rule the other provinces, but you rule this one. And, by the way, I accidentally killed off all the leaders of the wise men. So that job's yours too. It never says Daniel had any fight to gain control of the wise men at this point. Tells you that their leaders were all gone. It's an amazing thing. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges who God is. Truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. He is it. I'm going to make you chief administrator of all the wise men. I'm going to make you the chief ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Other than me, you have no one that's more important than you. It says, and you're in control. And Daniel says, well, to help me administer Babylon, can my three friends be governors as well? He says, sure. Do whatever you want. You're in control of Babylon. So, all of a sudden they're calling them by their Babylonian names, but Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are suddenly also, they're third in command over Babylon. The whole province, not just the city. But Daniel, they were out ruling things. Daniel sat in the court of the king and helped him make good decisions. The slave who starts ruling, just like Joseph, God will bring up the people he wants brought up. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for your word. Thank you that you do watch over us and take care of us and protect us. Lord, that you bring us into the eyes of those who we need to be in, Lord, so that we can influence and help people see you as the great and mighty God. Lord, I pray that you would just bring us all into the place that we need to be, even though we may see ourselves as slaves or see ourselves in a low position, Lord God. Even a low position can do mighty things whenever you work through them, because we understand that doesn't matter what our earthly position is, it matters what our heavenly position is. And we are your sons and your daughters, Lord God. And I pray that you would bring us into the notice of the people we need to, so that we can influence others to get to know you better. Thank you for everything you've done. Lord, I pray that you would make this a good week, Lord. Take us from here safely and bring us back safely next week. In Jesus' name we pray.